Welcome to the GOTO podcast. Each episode covers the brightest and boldest ideas from the world's leading experts in software development. Tune in for practical lessons, compelling theories, and plenty of inspiration. GOTO gathers the brightest minds in the software community to help developers tackle projects today, plan for tomorrow, and create a better future. Stay up to date with the latest in tech through GOTO's top-rated events in cities like Amsterdam, London, Copenhagen, and Chicago, and by subscribing to the GOTO Conference's YouTube channel, where you can find thousands more high-quality dev talks. Learn more at gotopia.tech.
Hi, Nick.
Hey, Sarah.
So we're going to talk today, kicking off on something that came up when I was writing my talk for GOTO in Copenhagen this year. So I wrote a talk about governance and how to build governance that reduces risk without slowing people down. And when I was thinking about the examples, so many of them were related to AI implementations. And you and I have been working together across security and engineering. And it's something we've really noticed in the last year. And I know you've written about it. I wanted to talk about the current rush to adopt AI and why that introduces significant business risk. So I wanted to start just with a brief introduction. I don't want to bore people with too big an introduction. So my background is I'm an independent consultant. I generally work to help organizations improve their engineering effectiveness. It's often about making sure you have platforms and processes in place for delivering business value.
Yeah, and I'm Nick Selby, and I work with Sarah. I'm a managing partner at a company called EPSD. It doesn't stand for anything. It's just a group of independent consultants who got together and said we needed to start to address the strategic issues around information technology adoption. And some of the problems that we've noticed just in our consulting lives are often executives will be frustrated or confused about performance issues. And they'll say like, well, I thought we bought the best stuff. And I thought didn't we take care of that by going to X platform or X whatever? And meanwhile, the engineering teams and the developers who are being talked about like this are like, well, if you would stop pivoting, maybe we could get things done. And we suddenly realized that there was a huge chasm between how these groups communicate and what they talk about. And that happens to be what we're good at.
Yes. Yeah. I think it's really interesting because whenever you talk to people and the problem is, our engineering team are not delivering as much value as quickly as we expected, you go and you talk to the engineering team. And first of all, there are people who absolutely know where the problems are. But secondly, it's very, very rarely actually engineering. A lot of it is we don't actually know what our strategy is. We don't know what the direction is that we're going. We're being asked to spend no time on technical debt and keeping things up to date. And you just get slower and slower. Yeah. And I think that's been interesting for a few years, but now what's even making it more interesting is the rush to AI.
Absolutely. And it's funny when we did talk about that. And I actually think that the executives are usually saying things like, it's our engineering, and they expect a technical response. And the answer is usually, as you just said, it's usually a strategic or a programmatic response that is actually at heart. But because we've already used those words like an engineering problem or a technical problem, that it tends to further obfuscate the issue. But yeah, I'm with you completely.
Yeah. So we've been talking about some of the AI challenges, and I know that you were writing about this. You're talking about how there's a change in how in the terminology people are using when they talk about AI.
Yeah, there is, and this is I'm going to look up my notes because it's Heidi Helloff, who I know, but she's over at the AI Now Institute, and what they've recognized was that there's a tendency within the AI industry to change the terminology, where you'll hear phrases like vulnerability management or safety or red teaming. And what they're actually talking about is the same words, but it's describing totally different things. So for example, your lawyer in your general counsel might hear when they hear health and safety issues inside AI, and they might think that, oh yeah, that's typical product liability language. I know this. I've seen this before. And they're 100% wrong, because what the AI companies are actually talking about when they use those terms are things like our AI chatbot won't tell you how to make a TATP bomb. And that's what they mean. And it's really, really confusing to anyone who's not paying very, very close attention.
Yeah. And I think there's a couple of interesting aspects for me about AI tools that you might buy. Well, first of all, everyone wants to make sure they're trying things out to see if it has an impact.
Yeah.
But the companies that are building AI tools, they're very keen. They also have a fear of missing out. They need to get this out here now. And we all know that when there's a product that you're getting out now, it's possible that the security, like they're not quite thinking about, have we got MFA on our GitHub accounts? There's a whole load of stuff where like, we, as someone who would be helping companies to adopt a tool, would expect a certain level of stuff. So that's one aspect of it. And then the other aspect is to be valuable as an AI tool. Really, they need access to kind of the crown jewels of your company's data very often. So they're integrated with Salesforce. They're integrated with Slack. They're integrated with your G Suite. So it's kind of like, it feels like it's hugely risky. And there's a big push to say, yes, let's have this. So what do you have to do to make it safe for people to say yes to adopting AI tools?
Yeah. And I mean, and that is the big question, but you're right. The tendency, especially in Silicon Valley, is to push something out really quickly. Thinking of safety issues, right? When Apple Maps first came out, if you remember this, right? How many people had a screenshot of their destination being in the middle of a lake or the middle of an ocean, right? And that was a safety issue, right? If you're following turn by turn directions and it turns you into a wall or off a cliff, that's really not the best way to introduce somebody to using your product. Mm-hmm. And, it's also about functionality, not just about security. So I guess the thing that you and I have seen both individually and together in these engagements is let's first pay some great respect to the fact that CEOs are under extraordinary pressure from investors, from the board, from their peer group to be adopting and really using AI to change some of the fundamentals about how they do the basics. It's not just about the final product creation. It's really about absolutely everything. How are we doing accounts payable? Right? Oh, well, we should be using AI. How can we be tracking whatever it is that they want to track? Somebody's got an idea about how to use an AI tool. And there's a lot of pressure to show that you're doing that so that you can claim that you're being very competitive. You and I worked at a customer where they were victimized by the Drift SalesLoft breach, right? And this was it's an AI tool. It's a chatbot. And I was stunned. I don't think we've talked about this, but I was really stunned listening to their head of revenues talking about Drift, which for me was just this nightmare of an information security, unlimited blast radius. But the way the revenues person was looking at it was, this is the single greatest channel for high intent purchase that we've got, right? Having a chatbot on the main page of the website that will just ask you a couple of questions like, what state, country are you in, and what size is your organization? Great. Here's 3 appointments that you can have with a salesperson. Game changer, right? In order to do that, though, they needed to have access to Salesforce to be able to get, your leads and your opportunities. Mm-hmm. In this case, the Google Workspace, but it could have been Microsoft 365. To be able to look at the calendars of all these different people. They needed access to some HRIT because they needed to understand whose role it was and where the salespeople had their responsibilities. When you start to think about what it needs for such a simple task, just to set an appointment, it's an extraordinary amount of your most radioactive data.
Yeah. And I think quite difficult to necessarily know exactly what's been turned on, because these sorts of things have lots of integrations, and even something like, individuals may have had to give access to their Google Calendar.
Yes.
And so you have to be really sure that those people said only the minimal amount of access. I just think there's a huge challenge there. It's a huge challenge for people to get it locked down. to any extent.
Yeah. And it is a huge challenge, but here's the thing. It's a huge challenge even if you write it all down. Mm-hmm. And it's a huge challenge even if you talk to all of the people who are involved in this, in the nature of the choices that they're being asked to make. Mm-hmm. And what I've found in the last year and in our customers, and then in talking to colleagues in their customers or in the places where they work, nobody's doing that part. So the first thing is that pressure is so heavy for the CEO to adopt it that it's very likely that people will come into the office and say, AI the everything on a given Tuesday. Like, that's it. We've got to AI things. So some of the things that we've been seeing is people are not asking for what are the goals of this particular AI tool that we're thinking of implementing. What do we want it to do? What do we not want it to do? Right. And sort of writing down those kinds of things. They're not thinking what is the data that it needs to have in order to do that, let alone the minimum data, but just what's the data. And remember, AI tools, the first product requirement, if you're selling an AI tool, is you need to be able to suck in data from any place, anywhere, all the time. So they are extraordinarily good at finding ways to get in to data repositories. Is second. You mentioned somebody giving access to a personal account. And so as soon as they do that, now the AI tool is able to ingest data, not just from that user, but also anything that's been shared with that user that may have been shared with other people. So it gets insidious and it grows. There's a huge network effect here.
Yeah. For me, there's a lot of aspects where things that you needed anyway are just exacerbated by AI. So you really want to know what you've actually got in your estate. What have you got turned on and what does it grant access to? But you need it even more when there's so many things that are being connected up and accessing your data.
Yes.
But that visibility, that ability to say, well, okay, so we've got this tool. What is it integrated with? Do we have a diagram that shows the various integrations that have been turned on? Or are we going to get partly way through an incident and go, oh, I didn't realize it was also connected to this other thing?
Well, the answer to that one is yes. You're absolutely going to find that. And we've got clients where they've had a couple of different AI related incidents. And I say that I'll get to the reason in a second, but what they have discovered is that what we refer to as the blast radius, like what happens if this thing detonates in your organization? How much can it hurt? The blast radius is much, much bigger than most people give it credit for. Yeah. But here's the other, I think, critical difference between, because what you just described, we could say that for most enterprise tools, even Salesforce, like finding out what is actually connected to your Salesforce cloud is really a complex set of problems. But typically, if it's not an AI tool, it's not doing it super fast and super aggressively. What a lot of CEOs, COOs, CTOs, what they're kind of thinking is, well, it's OpenAI or it's Anthropic. It's like these are big companies. This is enterprise accounts. So this is enterprise software. Surely this is not much different from the other enterprise tools that we have, like Salesforce itself and G Suite and Microsoft and Slack and Atlassian. But it really is. And if you take a look at the most devastating AI related security challenges that we've seen in the last 2 years, but a lot this year because there's been an acceleration of these attacks. What's happening is that criminal gangs, hackers, people who have nefarious intent, they are finding that the basic information security paradigm within these AI products, like ChatGPT and the things that plug into different, the different AI chatbots that people are buying, they are failing really quite spectacularly at the most fundamental information security posture that one must need, that we would expect somebody who's selling into an enterprise to maintain.
So what advice would you give for people who are trying to who are working, for example, in security engineering or security in general, and you're trying to not be the people that say no, but you've got this wave of things coming towards you that is just, scary, basically. What would you advise?
Well, the first thing I advise is don't look at it as a security issue. This is actually an information technology issue, and the knowledge areas are deep and rich within information technology, whereas information security is kind of looked at as, well, we'll fix that. We've got that covered. Don't worry. But that's really not the way this goes. So this actually begins with business strategy. And I gave you the first one, right? And you don't need consultants to do this. You can do this yourself. Just sit down with a cross-disciplinary group of people and ask, well, we understand that this tool sounds like there's a really great upside to it. Like that chatbot I mentioned, right? That's a great upside. We'd like to get some of that. So now at that moment, this, interdisciplinary group is supposed to start asking those questions like, all right, what's the minimum amount of information that it needs in order to do this task that we think is going to be so great as all giddy up? What data does it actually need, and where does that data live? And that's a lot of work to actually back out. Most enterprises have their data in lots of different places. So mapping these things out is truly, truly important. And that's going to help you define that blast radius. What can go wrong? That's the question you have to ask. When it goes wrong, what do we lose? What's the worst thing that can happen? And if the answer is, well, this thing is connected with administrative access to Salesforce, Atlassian, Slack, and Microsoft 365 Mail, well, that's a lot that can go wrong simultaneously. So now is when you have to start looking at how can we reduce the amount of permissions that we give to this tool to its absolute bare minimum. How can we be certain that when we connect it, that configuration won't drift, that configuration won't change over time? So now we're into some monitoring. And how do we know when something goes wrong? Because when something goes wrong, the last thing you want to do, I'll give you one example. A couple of weeks ago, there was an unrelated AI chat thing that integrated with all these systems that we're talking about. And we saw the hack come through in threat intelligence channels at about noon Eastern time in the US. And we saw the official notification at around 6 p.m. Eastern time from the companies. So these things move really, really fast. You need to have your own telemetry so that you've identified what the thing's supposed to do and where it's supposed to get its data. You've identified that you've brought it down to the minimum allowable thing to get the result that you need because you've defined what your results are and what you want it to do. You've monitored it to make sure that when you make the configuration change, it won't change. And then you've put additional monitoring on it to see if something different happens. And if it does, set off all the alarm bells so that the team can look at it.
Yeah. And there's also an element, isn't there, I think, of the second time round, you've got a lot better idea of how do we quickly disable these integrations? Who do we need to get involved? What is the set of steps that we need to take? Because this is just like any sort of incident management. If you don't have an idea and you haven't practiced it and you don't have some kind of set of steps, it takes a while to get going. But I think having an idea of who do we need to get involved if there is a problem, what do we do? What's the mitigation for this? Which generally is disable stuff.
Hopefully disable stuff before it gets blown up. But we've just discussed some things that are, I think that this is the hardest for executives to wrap their heads around. What we've described is typically in the worlds of sales and revenue, maintenance of IT, product development, because it's going to be integrating with your product as well, right? Yeah. And traditional engineering plus information security and any other support teams that are around that. No, not any of those teams is going to have the information that they need to be able to make these decisions in advance about how you define and then reduce the blast radius. And if you count on, the guys who run our Salesforce, they've got this. No, they don't. Your revenue people are just going to be saying, okay, so it was a terrible hack. I understand that. So when can we turn it back on? Because we need to get going. And bless them. That's the way they should be acting. The security team is going to be kind of wanting to be more conservative about when they turn things back on. Yes. So what you really do need is this business structure around this to be constantly balancing the risk versus the benefit of anything that you do, either before or during the incident. Certainly after the incident, to make sure that, okay, what went wrong in this last time so that we don't make the same mistake again? Because we've seen this go very, very sideways. And the second time it happens, the better teams and the better performing teams, they've learned that lesson now. And they've already started the pattern of declaring ownership of certain functions within things that were traditionally sort of handed over to IT or security or engineering.
Yeah. So one of the things I've really liked, I've been working with you a little bit on security and threat modeling recently, and it's not an area that I'm a complete expert. I've mostly been in engineering. It's been very interesting to look at how you are putting it forward to people in the executive to say, the only people who can accept the risk is you. So we can explain what the risks are. And I think the thing that I found interesting with that was that there were decisions to, we're not going to integrate with this part of our estate because we actually don't think the risk of that is worth, the reward is worth the risk.
Yeah. It's an interesting moment when that happens, especially with companies that are very aggressive. But to me, the threat model is the place to start, because not necessarily because they're going to be correct about the threats. They're not, right? The threats are, for those of you who haven't done a threat model, it's like you look at things and you can put it into different categories of things that go wrong. Like, if somebody did an action, could they say it wasn't them? What's to stop them from saying, I never did that, right? So that, that's called repudiation. There's spoofing. There's all sorts of things that you can apply to this. But most important here is not necessarily getting all those threats correct. It is finding real world examples of how risks that the executives are considering leaving open or leaving unaddressed, how those risks can be exploited by attackers or by trusted third parties, right? Supply chain risk is really what's going on here. And so in identifying the threats, tying them to the risks that would enable those threats to be exploited, and then going back into more traditional risk language of likelihood and impact, which executives tend to understand, you can actually get executives to really have very, very, very quickly. We're talking, 1 or 2 meetings of listening to these threat models about what they're planning on AI. They will be like, they start to connect all those dots. And that's why it's so useful, because your security team doesn't accept risks on behalf of the company. You do. Your security team's job is to explain those risks to you in language that you can understand as an executive.
Yeah, I think that is just extremely powerful. And the threat model provides you with that context. It's really, I love it, because likelihood of a risk and the kind of the impact of that risk, if it happens, anyone can put those together and think, okay, this one, very unlikely, but massive downside if this is to happen. I think that's super interesting. So I guess we should wrap up. So what, is it true to just say, like, the thing about AI is it's exactly the same stuff you ought to be doing anyway, but my sense is that, and more of it, because certainly there's suddenly so many options. There's an explosion of potential tools that you could get in, and everyone's interested. So suddenly you're looking at assessing large numbers of different tools, which is a bit of a challenge as well. So I think for an engineering team or for security engineering team, part of it is, how do you even deal with the number of requests that are coming in for, can I try this thing out?
Yeah. And you've got to be systematic about that. You've got to have all of your support teams, like your legal, for sure, your information security, information technology, teams that manage, so SRE or teams that manage third-party tools. They all have to be involved. And it really is a return to fundamentals. What are some of the things that can go wrong just in terms of traditional enterprise information technology? I'll give you an example. Some of the you can do some amazing things with MCP servers, right? Model Context Protocol. You can do wonderful things and connect things together and do really great things. We have seen a number of them where, when we did the code audit, what we found was, the AI stuff worked perfectly. It's just that they were using old libraries and they hadn't patched anything, even brand new. Out of the box, they were already vulnerable. And so you need to start thinking about a vastly larger and more exploitable attack surface than you've been ever seen before. And because of these tools' propensity to gather as much data as they can, you have to think of data like water. It just seeps into absolutely everything. So what do you have in your organization that is not watertight? These are the kinds of questions that you need to ask before you turn things on. But before you even ask those, as I say, the teams that are going to be having these conversations, like legal and IT and security, you've got to define your terms. You've got to make your policies and be prepared to adapt them and change them regularly, because this industry and these technologies are moving so quickly.
I think that's a nice place to wrap this up, Nick. Thank you for this. This has been a really interesting discussion. I'm really enjoying looking at how we have to deal with the challenge of AI.
It is really kind of all of enterprise IT in one concentrated area. So yes, it tends to focus the mind.
Excellent. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the GoTo podcast. Head over to gotopia.tech to discover lots more content from the brightest minds in software development.